The air inside Logistics and Supply Warehouse Delta 9 hung thick and cold, a stagnant soup flavored equally by metallic lubricant, ozone from the humming server rack stacked near the ceiling, and the faint, sweet decay of old cardboard. It was a space designed for efficiency, yet existing in a state of perpetual, bureaucratic inertia. The fluorescent lighting, housed in long, cage-protected fixtures, cast a sickly yellowish pallor over everything, failing to penetrate the corners where the shadows coiled deep and undisturbed. The concrete floor, scarred by the relentless passage of heavy-duty forklifts, pulsed faintly with a low-frequency hum, the constant white noise of the immense bass grinding away, indifferent to the individuals within its confines. Cabo Montgomery stood precisely at the yellow safety line marked near the issue counter. She was small, almost lost against the backdrop of towering olive-drab crates, and the sheer scale of the shelving units that scraped the ceiling 20 feet above. Her uniform, the standard utility coverall, was faded almost white in patches, clinging to her thin frame. It smelled faintly of bleach, pine cleaner, and the stubborn sweat of honest, repetitive labor. Her tool of the trade rested near her worn boots, a standard-issue industrial mop, its cotton head stained, the immutable brown of military grime that no amount of scrubbing could fully eradicate. Montgomery clutched the long wooden handle, the familiar weight a comfort, an extension of her own quiet, efficient existence. Her hands, rough and calloused, were submerged in the cotton threads, keeping them warm against the warehouse chill. She had been standing there for 6 minutes and 42 seconds, according to the vast, synchronized digital clock mounted above the requisition window. 6 minutes and 42 seconds of silence, punctuated only by the distant thunk of a pallet being dropped in the yard outside, and the incessant high-pitched whine of the ventilation system struggling to circulate the cold, heavy air. Behind the reinforced plexiglass window sat Sergeant First Class Huntington. He was a man built of unnecessary bulk, his neck spilling slightly over the starched collar of his utilities. His face was round, shiny with a thin layer of grease that the cold couldn't dispel, and currently fixed in an expression of profound, studied inconvenience. He wore his logistical importance like a heavy, suffocating mantle. Huntington did not look at Montgomery. He was absorbed in the intricate ritual of clicking a mechanical pen repeatedly onto the surface of a laminated form. The sound, a sharp, irritating percussion that bounced off the high ceiling. Click, click, click. He took a slow, deep drag from a cup of coffee that smelled strongly of burnt chicory, exhaling a soft, audible sigh of manufactured distress. Montgomery did not move. She maintained the position of parade rest, her eyes fixed on the sergeant's name tag, waiting. Her breathing was shallow, disciplined, a habit formed long ago under different skies. After what felt like an eternity compressed into 90 more seconds, Huntington finally pushed the pen away with a theatrical flourish, leaning back in his squeaking leather chair. The chair let out a long, tortured yeek of protest. "Yes, Cabo." Huntington's voice was a low, oily rumble, edged with thinly veiled condescension. He didn't ask what she needed. He asked what she dared to interrupt him for. Montgomery placed the mop handle gently against the counter, ensuring it made no sound. "Sergeant Huntington," she began, her voice a low, almost husky murmur, respectful yet entirely devoid of subservience. "Requisition 40 Alpha 7, cleaning supplies, standard issue. We are out of the heavy-duty solvent for the motor pool drains. The usual inventory is showing 3 canisters allocated for Section Gamma." Huntington steepled his fingers, staring over them as if assessing a particularly complicated theorem rather than a request for floor cleaner. His gaze finally settled on Montgomery, sweeping over her faded uniform, the rough, practical boots, and the streaks of dried mud near the knees. His eyes lingered on the mop head with a visible curl of the lip. 40 Alpha 7, he repeated, savoring the syllables. He typed slowly on the keyboard, each key press a definitive, declarative statement of his control. Ah yes, the heavy stuff. Methylene chloride base, is it? Cost prohibitive, Cabo. Very much so. He tapped the screen with a manicured index finger. The inventory shows 3 canisters, correct, but the system shows they were diverted. Montgomery frowned, the movement slight, almost imperceptible. Diverted, Sergeant? The drain blockage is critical. If the filters back up, it will flood into the main maintenance bay. And that, Cabo, Huntington replied, his voice dripping with false empathy, is a management issue, not a supply issue. You see, the heavy solvent, that has been reallocated to Priority 1. Priority 1? Yes, the new paint shop. They needed it to strip the residue off the HV6 plates. High-value target, high-priority asset. He paused, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper designed to underscore the disparity in their respective roles. You are requesting industrial-grade chemical stripper to clean up the sludge from the latrines, Cabo. They are stripping million-dollar stealth panels. He spread his hands in a gesture of bureaucratic helplessness. I simply cannot authorize the use of P1 assets for janitorial tasks. I mean, come on. Where is the sense in that? Montgomery's expression did not change, but her grip on the mop handle tightened, a microscopic shift of muscle tension. Sergeant, she insisted, her tone firming, pulling against the casual cruelty of his dismissal. The requisition was made 3 days ago. These canisters were already signed out under our section budget. If they were diverted, the paperwork should reflect a cross-transfer. Huntington chuckled, a dry, brittle sound that offered no humor. The paperwork reflects what I say it reflects, Cabo. And right now, the system shows that the request is on hold, pending alternate solutions. He reached beneath the counter and pulled out a small, economy-sized bottle of lemon-scented floor cleaner, holding it up like a trophy. It was the generic, watery stuff used for light surface cleaning, entirely useless against hardened sludge. This is what you get, Cabo, the yellow bottle. It smells nice. Try using a little elbow grease. That's free, isn't it? The insult, heavy and deliberate, hung in the air. It wasn't just a denial of supplies. It was an erasure of her effort, a minimization of her crucial, if unseen, role in maintaining the function of the base. Montgomery's eyes flickered down to the yellow bottle, then back up to Huntington. She measured him for a long, silent moment. The hum of the ventilation seemed to grow louder, filling the space where her protest should have been. "Sergeant," she stated, her voice now flat, devoid of emotion, "if the maintenance bay backs up, the base loses capability in 3 critical areas. That affects P1 immediately. Then you should scrub harder, shouldn't you?" Huntington retorted, his voice rising, annoyed that she dared to argue logic against his authority. He hated the quiet dignity of her posture, the way she didn't collapse into immediate surrender. "Look, I'm a busy man. I have actual assets to manage. Don't waste my time arguing policy over a quart of cleaner. Take the lemon juice and go." He shoved the yellow bottle across the counter with enough force that it skidded and stopped right at the edge of the glass, threatening to topple over. Montgomery watched the bottle. Her jaw worked once, silently. She lowered her head slightly, a gesture that looked like capitulation, but was, in fact, the gathering of internal focus. "Understood, Sergeant," she said softly. She reached out and picked up the bottle, her movements precise. She did not look at him again. She turned her back, retrieved her mop, and began the slow, deliberate walk back toward the vast, echoing mouth of the warehouse. Click, click, click. Huntington immediately resumed his annoying pen game, dismissing her completely. Montgomery walked past the stacked pallets of combat rations and the shrink-wrapped bundles of camouflage netting. Her back felt stiff, not from the physical strain of her duties, but from the grinding friction of being invisible and dismissed. She was almost at the exit bay, a massive hydraulic door currently lowered, when a sharp, new sound cut through the general hum of the warehouse. It was the distinct, rhythmic thump, thump, thump of boots hitting the concrete floor with focused intent. Not the shuffling gait of general base personnel, but the purposeful stride of someone who knew exactly where they were going and why. Montgomery paused near a stack of unused snow camouflage netting, instinctively moving slightly into the shadows. 3 men entered the warehouse, moving as a tightly coordinated unit, despite not being in formation. They were dressed in sterile, dust-grey tactical clothing, clearly fresh from a high-security briefing or a clean-room environment. They wore no visible rank on their collars, only small, subtle patches that indicated an external, specialized unit. Tier 1. The man leading them stopped abruptly, his movement slicing the air. He was tall, lean, and moved with a terrifying economy of motion. His gear, a minimalistic load-bearing vest and a specialized radio harness, was clearly non-standard issue. His eyes, set deep beneath the brim of a baseball cap bearing no insignia, were sweeping the expanse of the warehouse, missing nothing. This was Lieutenant Commander Reese. He was GROM-trained, specialized in counter-terrorism maritime operations, currently running a joint NATO liaison mission on the base. He had come here for a critical piece of hardware, but his focus instantly locked onto the lone figure standing near the camouflage stacks, clutching a mop and a yellow bottle of citrus cleaner. Reese stopped, and the 2 operators behind him froze instantly, their collective momentum dissipating without a command. He watched Montgomery. She was still now, perfectly still, almost blending into the environment. Most people, when faced with unexpected high-speed movement, would flinch or at least shift their center of gravity. Montgomery did neither. She simply waited. It was the stance. Reese had spent 2 decades studying human movement under extreme pressure. He could read the subtle tension in the deltoid muscles, the way the spine settled into the pelvis, the width of the stance. She was standing at rest, yet she was balanced for immediate, violent lateral movement. Her focus was inward, but her peripheral awareness was clearly active. He took a slow, deliberate breath, drawing in the scent of oil and cold metal. He ignored the 2 operators who were beginning to exchange curious glances. He looked closer at Montgomery's hands. The left hand rested loosely on the shaft of the mop, but the thumb and index finger were positioned low on the wood grain, forming a perfect C grip, the exact position needed to instantly transition the mop from a cleaning tool into a blunt force striking weapon, ready for a short, lethal deployment. Reese felt a cold tingle of recognition slide down his spine. No cleaner, no matter how dedicated, stood like that. He started walking again, slowly, deliberately, detaching from his team. His boots, high-end, waterproof tactical boots, made no sound as he approached the issue counter where Sergeant Huntington was still engaged in the self-important ritual of pen-clicking. As he passed Montgomery, Reese allowed his gaze to flick down, past her boots, to the small, subtle discoloration of her ankle. He saw it, a faint, 3-inch-long scar tracing the line of her Achilles tendon. It was thin, precise, and entirely inconsistent with a casual injury. It looked like a clean slice from shrapnel or a deep grazing wound. He catalogued the detail and moved on. Huntington looked up, annoyed by the interruption of his rhythm, but his demeanor instantly shifted when he registered the quality of Reese's gear and the quiet intensity radiating from him. "Sergeant," Reese said, his voice quiet, carrying the deep, resonant timbre of someone used to being instantly obeyed. "Lieutenant Commander Reese, we're here for the A-22 thermal optic scope set. It was cleared for extraction at 1400. Huntington stumbled over his words. "Commander, yes, sir. Of course. Right this way. High priority, sir." He scrambled out of his chair, nearly tripping over the cheap plastic guardrails. Reese nodded curtly, then paused, turning his body slightly. His eyes were not on Huntington, but on the requisition counter. He noticed the yellow bottle of lemon cleaner sitting where Montgomery had left it, and next to it, the crumpled, discarded form labeled 40 Alpha 7. "Sergeant Huntington," Reese said, his voice dropping slightly. "I noticed you were engaged with staff moments ago. Everything squared away?" Huntington puffed out his chest, desperate to demonstrate control in front of the Tier 1 operator. "Just a minor internal logistics issue, sir. Janitorial supplies. Nothing important. Just reminding Cabo Montgomery here that we prioritize operational readiness over mop water. He offered a forced, servile smile. Reese's gaze drifted past Huntington, locking onto Montgomery again, who was still standing patiently in the shadow of the camo netting. He saw the way she didn't react to the dismissive language, the perfect, rigid control she maintained over her facial muscles. Reese slowly picked up the discarded requisition form. He smoothed out the creases with meticulous care. He read the header: heavy-duty solvent, critical drainage clearance. "I see," Reese murmured. He looked at Huntington. "And you denied this?" "With all due respect, Commander, yes. I diverted the industrial solvent to the P1 paint team. That's assets preservation. She can use the standard issue cleaner." Huntington gestured toward the yellow bottle. "They need to use more elbow grease, frankly." Reese laid the requisition form back down. His movements became agonizingly slow, detailed, and utterly deliberate. The air temperature in the immediate vicinity seemed to drop several degrees. He looked at the lemon cleaner bottle. Then he looked at Huntington. "Sergeant," Reese said, his voice still low, but now carrying an undeniable edge of steel. "You are responsible for the physical logistics and maintenance flow of this installation. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir, I am." "And you understand that the integrity of the physical infrastructure, including drainage and ventilation, is directly proportional to operational readiness." Huntington shifted his weight, suddenly uncomfortable under the unwavering scrutiny. "Well, yes, sir, but you chose to unilaterally deny a critical maintenance request based on your subjective estimation of its relative importance versus paint stripper." Reese didn't phrase it as a question. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the damning clarity of a judge reading a verdict. He turned his head completely, looking down the warehouse at Montgomery. Montgomery raised her head slightly, meeting his gaze across the 70 feet of concrete. Her eyes were deep-set, a color Reese couldn't quite discern in the dim light, but they held the unmistakable flatness, the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had survived things the average soldier only read about in textbooks. Reese recognized the ghost in those eyes. He had seen it reflected in his own mirror countless times. He turned back to Huntington, his voice dropping to a near whisper that nonetheless seemed to echo off the walls. "Sergeant, you have just committed an act of gross incompetence that directly endangers the operational integrity of this base. And you did it while simultaneously insulting a fellow soldier for conducting her duties." Huntington sputtered, turning a mottled red color. "Sir, that's harsh. She's just a cabo, a cleaner. She's not even essential personnel." Reese's eyes narrowed slightly. He did not raise his voice. He simply asked one question, a low vibration that seemed to shake the logistics counter. "How long have you been in service, Sergeant?" 8 years, sir. Almost 9. Huntington straightened his jacket. 8 years, Reese repeated slowly. "And in those 8 years, you have clearly learned nothing about observation, nothing about respect, and absolutely nothing about the nature of the warriors who keep this base functional." Reese stepped away from the counter, his eyes still locked on Montgomery. Operation Red Sabre, Kandahar, 2010, the genesis of the scar and the cross. Reese's internal clock seemed to slow, the image of Montgomery triggering a deep, archived memory trace. He wasn't seeing the cleaner anymore. He was seeing the silhouette of a ghost, draped in dust and high-grade combat armor. It was the weight. The memory always began with the weight, not the weight of the specialized GPNVG-18 quad-tube night vision goggles strapped to the helmet, nor the 70 pounds of sustained operations gear. It was the crushing, psychological weight of absolute silence in a place designed for violence. Kandahar Province, early autumn 2010. Target: a high-value cell leader utilizing ancient irrigation Carez tunnels to move ordnance. Montgomery, then Specialist Montgomery, attached as specialized EOD forward recon to a multinational task force, Polish GROM, US SOF, and UK SAS, was deep inside the tunnel network. The air was stagnant, thick with the smell of wet earth, copper sulfate, and a strange, sweet, almost floral scent that she knew was the precursor chemical for homemade explosives. Her breath was loud in her ears, regulated and controlled, forcing the oxygen into her burning lungs. She was leading Whiskey 3, her specialized four-man deep penetration unit. They had moved 1.7 kilometers beneath the surface. The darkness was total, broken only by the sickly green light emanating from her NVGs, which turned the tunnel into a landscape of distorted, spectral moss and shifting shadows. She felt the tremor first, not through her ears, but through the soles of her boots, a faint rhythmic thump, thump, thump. Not a heartbeat, a tamper. She raised her hand. The three men behind her, Krzyś, Polish EOD, her partner, Sergeant Martinez, sniper observer, and Private First Class Davies, medic, froze instantly. The discipline was muscle memory. Montgomery knelt, her body folding silently into the mud. She pressed her helmet microphone, whispering, "Whiskey 3, confirming subterranean contact, forward position, potential IED initiation sequence, standby, thermal read." She activated the small thermal viewer on her forearm. The display shimmered, showing the temperature variances in the earth ahead, and there it was, unmistakable, the rectangular heat signature of a buried, insulated pressure plate, too large for an anti-personnel mine. This was a monster. 5 meters ahead. Pressure plate, large bore, likely 155mm casing, high-concentration fertilizer mix, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the blood rushing in her own ears. "Krzyś, deploy!" Krzyś, a massive man with a quiet disposition and the hands of a watchmaker, moved forward, pushing his customized EOD kit before him. They worked in the pitch black, relying solely on touch and the spectral light. Minutes stretched into hours. Every grain of grit under her knee pad felt like a boulder. The sweat tracked cold lines down her back, mixing with the dust and the grime. Krzyś was meticulous, brushing away the earth near the initiation wire. "The wire is tight, Monty," Krzyś reported, his Polish accent thick with concentration. "Mercury tilt switch on secondary line. Complex build. They knew we would sweep for primary tripwires. Can you cut the power loop?" "I can try. But if I sever the circuit too far from the plate, the capacitor might still fire the primary charge." Silence settled again, heavy and paralyzing. They were suspended in a void, a single snip away from vaporization. It was then that Martinez, providing covering fire from 20 feet back, whispered urgently, "Monty, thermal anomaly, 3 o'clock, high profile. They are entering the tunnel from the upper access shaft. 2, maybe 3 men, armed." The ambush was sprung. They hadn't just booby-trapped the tunnel. They had trapped the team between a massive IED and the closing enemy force. "Martinez, Davies, cover the rear. Suppress," Montgomery ordered, her voice calm, professional. "Krzyś, forget the main charge. We don't have time. What's the secondary fuse proximity?" Krzyś's breathing hitched. "It's too close. 2 meters from the plate. It's a short delay fuse, pressure activated." "Pressure activated?" "Meaning it's designed to detonate if we step on the plate, or if the surrounding earth is shifted too violently by secondary blasts." "Exactly," Krzyś confirmed grimly. The tunnel erupted behind them, the distinct rattling report of AK-47 fire mixed with the heavy, disciplined retort of Martinez's suppressed Scar-H. Davies, the medic, was shouting tactical commands. "Krzyś!" Montgomery yelled, shedding her pack. "We breach the tunnel roof above the IED, now! We can't dismantle it, we use it against them!" This was a suicidal play. The tunnel roof was unstable. Breaching it with explosives while simultaneously under fire risked collapsing the entire structure, burying them alive, or triggering the IED. "No, Monty, it's too risky," Krzyś protested. "It's the only risk we have left," she snapped, grabbing the small, high-explosive breaching charge from his pack, the specialized lightweight charge designed for concrete. She armed the short fuse. "Martinez, fire pattern Delta, pin them down! I need 10 seconds of continuous fire." Martinez roared his acknowledgement, the tunnel filled with concentrated suppression fire, the muzzle flashes blinding even through the NVGs. Montgomery raced forward, moving past the massive IED plate, scrambling up the slick, mossy side of the tunnel. She affixed the breaching charge precisely, counting the seconds. 5 seconds. The enemy fire intensified. 4 seconds. A sharp thwack sound. Martinez screamed, a short cutting sound of agony. 3 seconds. Davies was calling out, "Medic down! Martinez hit! Multiple entry wounds!" 2 seconds. She pulled the pin on the fuse. 1 second. She threw herself downward, back toward Krish. Fire in the hole! The detonation was deafening, even muffled by the surrounding earth. The breaching charge blew a neat, violent hole upward. The roof groaned, protesting the violence. Earth and rock rained down, but the IED remained intact. Then the tunnel itself gave way. Not a collapse, but a rupture. The breaching charge had created a fissure that connected their subterranean space to a nearby parallel drainage trench, a trench that was currently filled with the main enemy fighting force. Before the smoke and dust cleared, they heard the surprised shouts of the enemy force, quickly replaced by the muffled roar of machine gun fire from the parallel trench. "We bought time!" Montgomery gasped, shaking the debris from her helmet. "Krish, we need to move Martinez now!" But Krish didn't answer. He was staring aghast at the ground. During the breach explosion, a small, fist-sized rock, thrown with explosive velocity, had struck the exposed, flimsy wiring near the secondary pressure switch of the IED. It hadn't triggered the main charge, but it had successfully and accidentally damaged the safety mechanism. A tiny, ominous light was flashing rapidly on the secondary timer. "Impact," Krish whispered, his voice cracking. "The secondary fuse is active. 5 seconds. 5 seconds to escape a massive explosion in an enclosed tunnel." Montgomery reacted instantly, her training overriding pure fear. There was no time to run, no time to disarm. She looked at Martinez, bleeding profusely and unable to move. She looked at Davies, desperately trying to bandage Martinez under enemy fire. She looked at Krzyzh, frozen in terror. "Protect the team." She shoved Krish backward toward Davies and Martinez, bellowing, "Get back! Duck!" Then, with an impossible surge of adrenaline, she threw herself forward, using her body as a makeshift shield. She did not touch the pressure plate. She launched herself over the main plate and landed directly on the activation mechanism of the secondary fuse, a small, spring-loaded lever designed to be triggered by minimal movement. Her body weight absorbed the minimal upward pressure, momentarily stabilizing the mechanism. It bought them perhaps half a second. The secondary charge detonated first, a blinding flash followed by a high-velocity spray of shrapnel and rock designed to disorient and maim. Montgomery felt a searing, unbelievable pain in her left leg, immediately followed by the numbing shock of the massive main charge firing directly beneath her. The Windentweis V5mm casing, filled with fertilizer explosive, lifted the entire section of the tunnel floor. Montgomery was hurled 20 feet through the air, hitting the tunnel wall with a sickening impact that momentarily stole her vision and breath. The explosion consumed the tunnel, turning it into a howling vortex of heat, noise, and destruction. When the noise finally subsided, replaced by a dull, ringing silence, she was slumped against the wall, half buried under a fresh avalanche of dirt and rock. The shrapnel from the secondary blast had sliced through the armor on her left ankle, the precise, thin cut that Reese had observed on her Achilles tendon. The main blast had broken 2 ribs and collapsed her left lung, but the sheer size of the device placed beneath the floor meant that the majority of the blast force was directed upward, vaporizing the surrounding earth rather than horizontally toward her team. Davies, Krish, and Martinez survived the blast wave, protected by the brief, catastrophic shield Montgomery had provided. Martinez was evacuated, surviving his wounds. Davies carried shrapnel, but lived. Krish, traumatized, managed to drag Montgomery out of the collapsed tunnel section. For that action, the split-second, impossible decision to use her own body to contain the blast and save her unit, Specialist Montgomery was awarded the Krzyzh Walecznik, the Polish Cross of Valor, one of the most distinguished awards for military bravery in the face of imminent danger. She received it from the Polish commander of Task Force Black, pinned to her hospital gown while she was still fighting infection in a field hospital. When she returned to duty, her injuries made combat roles untenable. She refused a medical discharge and asked for the most rigorous, unnoticed job possible: logistic support and maintenance. She wanted silence, hard work, and to be forgotten. Part 4. The Intervention and the Reckoning. Reese's focus snapped back to the present. The entire recollection had taken less than 3 seconds in real time, yet it was burned into his memory because he had worked alongside those operators in that theater, and he knew the Krzyż Walecznych was rarely, if ever, given to foreign soldiers. It meant extraordinary dedication. He looked at the small woman with the mop, recognizing the deep, quiet fortitude that radiated from her. He stepped directly in front of Sergeant Huntington, completely blocking his view of the rest of the warehouse. "Sergeant Huntington," Reese said, and the shift in his voice was palpable. It was no longer the tone of an annoyed officer. It was the predatory growl of a specialist who had just identified a threat in his operating environment. "The soldier you just insulted," Reese continued, articulating each syllable with razor-sharp precision. "The one you dismissed as just a cabo is not merely essential personnel. She is, by any metric, more valuable than everything in this depot combined." Huntington's face, which had been red with arrogance, began to pale. He could feel the cold, undeniable hostility radiating from Reese. "Sir, I don't understand your concern about a cleaning cabo." "That is precisely the problem, Sergeant. You don't understand. You look at the dirt on her clothes and the mop in her hand, and you assign value based on visible function. You failed to look closer." Reese took a half-step back, ensuring that the light caught the left side of Montgomery's collar, where her current mandated rank was pinned, the single faded stripe of a cabo, private first class. "Cabo Montgomery," Reese called out, not loudly, but clearly enough that the 2 Tier 1 operators waiting 20 feet away immediately stood straighter, sensing the change in atmosphere. "Step forward," Montgomery complied instantly, dropping the yellow bottle, which clattered harmlessly on the concrete. She walked toward them, her spine rigid, her eyes fixed forward. She moved with the fluid, contained power Reese had first recognized. As she stepped into the direct path of the overhead lighting, the faint light caught the details on her faded uniform jacket, above her left breast pocket. Huntington squinted, trying to make out the small, subtle discoloration that had seemed like old coffee stains or bleached fabric earlier. Reese pointed a single, unwavering index finger at the tiny embroidered patches and the pin slots above her service ribbons. "You called her just a cabo, Sergeant Huntington," Reese said, his voice now a low, chilling recitation. "But I know soldiers who wear the uniform, and I know what it means when a soldier who should be wearing the full weight of her service records chooses to wear almost nothing at all." He leaned closer to the sergeant, forcing eye contact. Huntington's breathing became shallow, rapid gasps. "Let's look at the ghost in the machine, Sergeant. Let's look at what she earned." Reese began to speak, his voice gaining a cadence, a rising intensity that transformed the logistics warehouse into a courtroom. "First," Reese began, pointing to a small, extremely subtle dark spot near the breast pocket, a permanent faded thread, marking where a pin had rested for years. "The unit patch is removed, but the shadow of the stitch lines remains. Look closer, Sergeant. That is the ghost of the Wojska Specjalne insignia, the Polish Special Forces Grom, an attachment patch. This soldier served at the highest level of combined NATO SF operations." Huntington's eyes widened, darting between Reese and Montgomery. Reese moved his finger slightly higher, tracing the outline where a Combat Action Badge, CAB, was usually affixed. "The Combat Action Badge earned in direct ground combat, removed. But the indentation on the fabric is still there, Sergeant. It takes hundreds of hours of laundry to achieve that level of erasure, yet the memory of the metal remains. He paused, letting the information sink in. Montgomery remained motionless, allowing the scrutiny, betraying nothing. Reese then moved to the ribbon rack, where most soldiers wore rows of colored cloth signifying minor tours and good conduct. Montgomery's uniform bore only 4 extremely small, faded loops of ribbon, pinned so tightly together they were almost invisible. They looked insignificant, dull against the washed-out cloth. Reese read them, not from memory, but from the deep, immediate respect they commanded. "And now, Sergeant, we look at why you address this soldier by her lowest functional rank, when you should be addressing her with the reverence of history." Reese tapped the first ribbon, a dark red stripe cut by a faint white line, barely visible. "This, Sergeant, is not standard issue. This is the Bronze Star Medal, awarded for meritorious achievement or service in a combat zone. Look at the service device. See the V device, Sergeant. Valor. She earned it under fire." Huntington involuntarily took a shuffling step backward, bumping into the plexiglass window. His eyes darted nervously. Reese moved to the second, slightly wider ribbon, a mix of green, red, and blue. "This is the Legion of Merit, an award not given lightly, for exceptionally meritorious conduct in the performance of outstanding services and achievements. This implies strategic level input, not sweeping flaws." This soldier was making command decisions. He moved to the third. This ribbon was complex, a mixture of gold, white, and maroon stripes. The Meritorious Service Cross from Canada, one of the highest honors awarded to Canadian or Allied forces for devotion to duty in the face of hazard. She fought alongside our allies, and they saw fit to give her the highest praise for her courage. Reese paused, letting the cumulative weight of the decorations crush the sergeant's arrogance. Huntington was sweating now, a thin, visible sheen appearing on his forehead. His face was no longer red, but a sickly grey. Then Reese focused on the final tiny ribbon, the one that looked like little more than a smudge of white and crimson. It was barely recognizable. Reese touched it with near religious awe. "And this, Sergeant, this is the reason why your insignificant post is still operational, why your supply lines remain clear, and why you are still breathing." He recited the name of the decoration in a low, reverent tone, pronouncing the difficult Polish consonants perfectly. Krzyż Walecznych, the Cross of Valor. The name hung in the air, heavy, historical, terrifying. Reese continued, his voice dropping to a near-religious whisper. "The Cross of Valor, Sergeant, awarded by the Polish Armed Forces to individuals who have demonstrated deeds of valor and courage on the battlefield. Not just bravery, Sergeant. Valor. This award signifies an action of extraordinary, immediate self-sacrifice, under circumstances of catastrophic danger, an action that saved the lives of her unit." Reese finally stepped back, looking from the decorations to Montgomery, and then delivering the final, crushing judgment to Huntington. "This soldier, Cabo Montgomery, served in deep tunnels under Kandahar. She took a blast designed to kill a heavy vehicle, and she shielded her team with her body. She sacrificed her combat career for her men. She could wear a Silver Star or the Distinguished Service Cross. She chooses to wear the uniform of a cabo and scrub the filth you are too lazy to address." Reese leveled his gaze at Huntington. "You called her not essential. She is the foundation. She is the rock upon which we all stand, and you, Sergeant, denied her the supplies she needs to maintain that foundation." The two operators behind Reese, massive men who rarely showed emotion, had their eyes fixed on Montgomery, a silent, powerful acknowledgement of respect. Huntington was trembling violently. The grease on his face seemed to run as cold sweat broke out. His breathing was audible, shallow, and panicked. He looked down at the mop, then back at the faint, ghostly outlines of the valor decorations, suddenly realizing the true rank of the woman he had just ordered to use more elbow grease. He had not insulted a janitor. He had insulted a legend who had chosen humility. "Sir," Huntington finally managed, the word a choked gasp. I wasn't aware." "Ignorance," Reese cut him off sharply, "is not an excuse, Sergeant. It is incompetence. You are relieved of duty immediately, pending a full review of your conduct and your gross dereliction in prioritizing maintenance requirements. Huntington looked like a man who had just been hit by an invisible truck. He stumbled backward again, his hands flying up defensively. "No, sir, please. I'll issue the supplies. I'll issue everything she needs." Reese ignored him entirely. He turned his attention back to Montgomery. "Cabo," Reese said, and the respect in his voice was absolute. "I apologize for the conduct of this inadequate excuse for a soldier." Montgomery met his gaze. For the first time, a small, weary emotion flickered in her eyes. Not gratitude, but a profound, deep comprehension. "Understood, Commander," she replied quietly. Reese took another step, closing the distance. He reached down and gently picked up the useless yellow bottle of lemon cleaner. He looked at it for a moment, then crushed the thin plastic container with a single slow squeeze of his hand. He dropped the ruined bottle into a nearby waste bin. Then he turned to his lead operator. "A-22 optic set. We'll wait," Reese commanded. The operator nodded, moving immediately to secure the high-value item, sensing the final, crucial exchange that was about to take place. Reese reached behind his own back, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. He reached for the strap of the rifle slung across his chest. This was no ordinary weapon. It was an HK-416, modified specifically for maritime operations, featuring a lightweight suppressor, thermal optics integration, and a highly tuned trigger mechanism. The weapon was a tool, a partner, and a representation of the operator's commitment to his craft. It was his most personal, sacred possession. Reese unhooked the sling and held the rifle horizontally across his chest, the black matte finish absorbing the warehouse light. He looked at Montgomery. "Cabo Montgomery," Reese stated, his voice ringing with formal, deep military respect. "You have earned the silence and the peace you seek in this duty. Your dedication to the mission, even in this capacity, exceeds the requirements of every ranking officer on this base, myself included." He lifted the rifle, holding it out, stock first, toward her. "This weapon is consecrated by the blood of my brothers and sisters. It is my operational lifeblood. I offer it to you now, not as a gift, but as a recognition of absolute, unqualified valor and the highest respect a soldier can pay to another." The air was completely still. The only sound was the faint, rhythmic panting of Sergeant Huntington, who was now leaning heavily against the plexiglass, watching the incomprehensible ritual unfold. Montgomery's eyes fixed on the rifle. For the first time since the confrontation began, the careful mask of indifference cracked. A shadow of pain, mixed with surprise and a deep, archaic honor, crossed her features. She hesitated, her calloused hands still resting near the mop handle. "Commander Reese," she murmured, barely a breath. "I cannot accept your weapon. You already have, Cabo," Reese insisted, holding his position rigidly. "Acceptance is not about the physical item. It is about the acknowledgement of what you represent. Take it, if only for a moment." He held it steady. Slowly, carefully, Montgomery released the mop handle. It clattered gently onto the concrete floor. She raised her hands, the movements practiced and deliberate. She took the HK-416 from Reese's hands. The moment her fingers wrapped around the foregrip, the small, quiet woman holding a mop became instantaneously the ruthless, efficient operator of the past. Her stance subtly shifted, her shoulders aligning perfectly with the sight line. She didn't check the safety or the magazine. Her grip was that of someone who intrinsically knew the weapon's status. She held the rifle for 3 full seconds, allowing the weight, the balance, and the familiarity to settle over her like a mantle. It was a perfect fit. She looked Reese in the eye, the gratitude profound yet unspoken. "Thank you, Commander," she said. She meticulously handed the rifle back to him, stock first, returning it with the same reverence with which it had been offered. Reese accepted it, the transition flawless, and re-slung the weapon. He felt the cold relief of the steel against his chest. "I will ensure the full allocation of your requested solvents, Cabo Montgomery," Reese stated firmly. and I will ensure that you are never again interrupted or insulted by anyone in this depot. Your file and your choice to remain anonymous will be respected." He nodded once, a sharp, precise military salute of respect that transcended rank. Montgomery gave a silent, almost imperceptible nod in return. She bent down and retrieved her mop, her posture reverting to the quiet humility of the cleaner. The ritual was complete. Reese turned his attention back to Sergeant Huntington, who was now clutching his chest, his eyes rolled back slightly in his head. The lieutenant commander called her a cabo, but then he read the Bronze Star, the Legion of Merit, and the Grom Patch, and then the Polish Cross. Huntington mumbled, his voice high and thin, the words slurring together as he processed the utter destruction of his reality. She was covering the blast, using her body. The weight of the realization that he had dismissed a combat hero of international standing over a bottle of cleaning fluid was too much. Huntington's knees buckled, his eyes fluttered once, and with a soft sliding sound against the plexiglass, he collapsed onto the floor, unconscious. The stress, the terror, and the swift absolute destruction of his petty authority had resulted in a complete systemic shutdown. The sergeant had fainted, just as the pilot in the melodramatic tales of the base would have, faced with an unexpected, overwhelming truth. Reese looked down at the crumpled logistics sergeant with cold disdain. "Take him out," he commanded his team without raising his voice, "and ensure that Cabo Montgomery's requisitions are filled before any other P1 assets are moved." As his team moved in to handle the inert form of Sergeant Huntington, Reese watched Montgomery quietly retrieve the discarded requisition form. She smoothed the creases, tucked it into her pocket, and began to walk toward the back maintenance bay, the mop her sole companion. The massive doors to the logistics bay began to groan open, letting in a thin, cold shaft of afternoon sun, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Montgomery walked into the light, ready to return to her work, leaving the high drama of rank and respect behind her, choosing the quiet dignity of the task over the thunder of her past glories. Her shadow, cast long and thin by the low sun, carried the faint, indelible outline of a warrior's posture. The ghost remained,